Hi there, everyone. Welcome to this event, Understanding the Tensions in Leicester. My name is Kazim. I'm a researcher here at the Community Policy Forum, which is an independent think tank seeking to promote evidence-based and community-centered approaches to policymaking on the structural inequalities facing Muslim communities in the UK. We attempt this through connecting policymakers with academic research and experts, and through providing platforms for engagement with diverse Muslim voices on areas of contemporary importance. I'm very pleased today to be joined by three esteemed guests who have very kindly given up their time in order to discuss this very critical issue. Firstly, we're joined by Claudia Webbe, who is Member of Parliament for Leicester East. She was elected in 2019 and is the constituency's first female MP. We also have with us Rahman, who is a councillor in the Stoneygate ward in Leicester, and she is approaching her fourth year as a councillor. Finally, and certainly last but not least, we're joined by Shockat Adam Patel, who is a Leicester resident and activist. He also volunteers for and is a board member at the non-profit organisation Muslim Engagement and Development, MEND. So to kick off the discussion, my first question is for yourself, Shockat. So many have obviously seen snippets on the news about the most recent bout of violence and disturbances between Leicester's Hindu and Muslim communities. But the newscasts actually barely scratch the surface on what I'm sure is a very complex issue. So for the benefit of those watching, could you please give us an overview of the timeline and how it is that we got to this particular point?
Hi, Kazim, good evening. Thank you for having me on. You're quite right. It is a complex issue. It's not a binary. It's not as simplistic as some people would like us to believe. It's not even, I would say, it's quite dangerous to even look at it as a Hindu-Muslim conflict. There's two strands to this, and I'll be very brief. One is a micro and one is a macro reason why these troubles happen in my city, in an area which I grew up in. So it was personally very disturbing and unsettling for myself to see these things happen where I grew up with my Hindu and Sikh friends. So let's look at the micro reasons. First of all, we have this area called North Evington, which is a relatively dense area in terms of population. It's made up of a mixture of people of varied faiths, but predominantly I would say it's Muslim, Hindu and Christian and Sikh. It's a bustling area. It has mosques, it has temples, it has gurdwaras, and many shops, etc. And Leicester's famed for its food restaurants, etc. And they all live together in that area. In very recent times, we've had a new community arrive in this area, which is not from the traditional trajectory of the people that came when I came to this country, which was in the 1970s, which was India, East Africa to Leicester. This new community were put into this new area. They come from a slightly different part of India. They are traditionally fishermen. And I've said it before that I think if you want to be cruel to fishermen, you'll probably send them to Leicester because there's absolutely nowhere to fish in that area. They've had a lot of challenges coming into this city. They were faced with, we've had Brexit, we've had COVID, and now we've got the cost of living crisis. Now, this community, unfortunately, has not settled in as well for various reasons, and possibly most of them have got nothing to do with them, no fault of their own. And there was a lot of unsocial behavior, let's say. So loud music playing outside mosques, evidence of drinking till the late hours outside the mosque, catcalling or wolf whistling, ladies walking past, not because they're Islamophobic, but because they're drunk. So there was a lot of these little issues that the police, that our local authorities didn't get a grip of. So when we spoke to the youth in the area, they said that we've been complaining to the police of the unsocial behavior in our parks. It was unsafe for us to walk. They make noise till late evenings because they like to light bonfires, etc. And nobody got a handle of it. So collectively, this all built up. So these are the micro issues, and I've really skimmed across this. I'm sure there's much more that can be added. Now, the macro issue is my city that, as I said before, when I grew up in this area with my Hindu friends and neighbors, we never had an issue in conflict in terms of religion. But over the last decade, I would say, we have seen this atmosphere of disharmony and discord between the Muslim and the Hindu community. Not everybody, but there was this us and them narrative being peddled, your area and our area sort of conversations happening. And there was a very open case in where all this was just sort of in the background, but a tangible, the first time that I experienced it in Leicester as a tangible was in 2017, when an application went in for an education centre to be converted into a madrasa, into an Islamic education institute. So it was a building that was previously a factory, and an application went in. And this building was in what people term as a Hindu area. It's not a term that I would like to use, but it was an area that was very in close proximity to a temple. So there was an objection for this building to be turned into a madrasa. Now, objection for a mosque or an objection to a madrasa is a completely legitimate exercise. I, as a Muslim, may object to a mosque being built next door to me because on grounds of noise or pollution or parking, etc., etc. It's completely legitimate. But the objections raised on the official Leicester City Council website for this institution, this building not to be turned into a madrasa, was we shouldn't have a mosque so close to a temple. This is a Hindu area, not a Muslim area. We do not feel safe with a mosque so close to our girls. Our girls will be threatened by Muslim men from this institution. We do not want a terrorist center next in our area. This religion causes nothing but trouble. And much to the shame of the Leicester City Council, they kept these up on their official website for days. And it was a targeted effort because the comments that were being made were not just from people in Leicester, people from London were joining in. So these were the two things that were leading up to it. Now, immediately before the Troubles, there was an incident where a young man who claimed to have been beaten up by 30 individuals from the Hindu faith after asking him his religion. Now, this is a live case at the moment, so we really can't discuss it too much. But again, after this claim was made, the police didn't respond promptly enough. So nothing was done about it. No statements were taken initially, no charges, obviously no statements were taken, nobody was charged, etc. So that raised up a lot of issues. Then it came into the national headlines after the cricket match. So this is when the media got interested in it, when there was chanting of death to Pakistan after a game that India beat Pakistan in. And in Leicester, majority of the Muslim community, not all, Councillor Sharmen here is obviously is not from, but a lot of the community is from India. So who they support in cricket, I'm not quite sure. But after that cricket match, there was the chants, there was a beating up of an individual where initially people thought he was a Muslim, but he was actually a Sikh individual. So that exploded. Then a few days later, another young man was set upon and said, a Muslim man was set upon, a young boy of 20, was set upon by another 30 Hindu youth after having asked him if he had pelted eggs on a temple. And this young man was beaten up quite black and blue, he had a broken arm, etc. So this was the backdrop of the violence that started. Then we saw close to 300 masked Hindu individuals marching for close to 3 miles from one area of the city all the way into the North Evington area of the city, chanting a chant which can be a religious chant, but also has been used by the RSS in India as a war cry. And these young hooded individuals masked up were carrying weapons, and that really exploded. And then we got the backdrop of which we saw a lot of unfortunate incidences, including the real objectionable and disgusting act of removing a flag from a Hindu temple. So that was very brief, and I hope that made sense. And that was some kind of sequential order of where this erupted and the backdrop of it.
Thank you very much, Shockat. That was definitely very clear, very insightful, and I think that's quite a bit. Like you brought up the cricket match, and I feel like from the perceptions or the discussions that I've seen, that's a lot of people trace it back to that, whereas you were sort of discussing the sequence of events that have sort of preceded this year and gone on for a number of, in fact, last week there was another match between India and Pakistan. Funnily enough, India also won that. I don't know if that triggered any tensions, but I don't think you can obviously
We've never
put it down
had
to just a
issues with
sports
cricket.
match. Exactly.
Never had issues with cricket in England, India versus Pakistan in the city. I mean, there's
Exactly. And I think that
banter,
shows
and
it,
there's
yeah.
wave flagging, but we've never had issues before. And like this, so in this case, it had nothing to do with the cricket match.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Shockat. I think before sort of we move on to responses, just teasing this out a little bit more, I'll stay with yourself, Shockat, for the time being. What is the current situation? Obviously, thinking about the cricket match, some of the tensions that have, you know, maybe continued immediately after that. I believe the beating of this young man happened, I believe it was in May. So there's quite a long timeline. We're now nearly in November. What is the situation at the moment? Have the streets in Leicester calmed down in terms of the tensions and the violence, or is there still a sort of simmering sense of disturbance in that part of the city?
The violence has calmed down, thankfully. There hasn't been many or any arrests made in recent weeks from the police, because they give us an update regularly. Has the tension calmed down? I'm not 100% sure. Unfortunately, it has created a little bit of friction between the two communities, a little bit of mistrust. People are speaking of still afraid of going out. Businesses I've spoken to have reported that they have lost earnings because people are not shopping in their restaurants or whatever businesses that they trade in both sides of the community. So there is a little bit of fear. But thankfully, there hasn't been any violence. The Lord Mayor has called for a public inquiry, and he has appointed somebody to conduct that. And there's a lot of work going on, hopefully behind the scenes, to bridge the disparity between the two communities.
Thank you, Shockat. I think we'll come back to the inquiry in a second. I'd like to now move on to yourself, Sharmen. So what has the response been sort of within the local community, sort of from local residents in the area in which you serve as a councillor, and also the wider council? Shockat obviously sort of mentioned the mayor's response, but in terms of the council itself and in terms of the local political scene, what has gone on in order to try and mitigate some of the violence and the tensions that have taken place?
So I think actually the response from the community has been exemplary in my view, because where there were failures perhaps from the police or perhaps from the local authority, the community carried the effective responsibility for that, and they really showed up. So, and I'm not talking about one specific group. What we saw was every human, pretty much regardless of their faith and their background, standing up together to say that this is not something we want in our streets, in our homes, on, you know, affecting our children and our lives. And that was a united response. And the response, the community response, is an example of who Leicester is, of what Leicester is, rather than the sort of the concentration on the violence that's happened over the last few weeks. So the community response has been one of defiance, one of unity, one of working together to ensure that this does not happen again. Unfortunately, I can't really say the same for the sort of the response politically. I do think that politically there was a little bit of absence in terms of just showing some leadership. We as councillors, we did speak to each other. We constantly spoke to each other to try and sort of encourage a political response from the leadership in the city. And unfortunately, that wasn't forthcoming soon enough, in my view, because over a matter of weeks, things escalated. And I do believe that had we had acted sooner, some of these things may not have happened or may not have been as bad as they were.
Thank you very much for your response, Sharmen. So actually moving on to yourself, Claudia. So I think we're kind of building up and opening things up to a wider level. Obviously yourself, Sharmen, discussed sort of the community response. You touched sort of on the wider political response. So in terms of yourself, Claudia, I mean, from the outside, from our perspective, from those of us sort of keeping up in the media, keeping up with perhaps what academics and other experts are saying about the issue, it seems as though the response from the government has been somewhat muted. And obviously, given, you know, the political situation, the passing of the Queen, there has been, of course, a lot going on, but those tensions in Leicester have still been simmering. I mean, what are your thoughts as an MP? What are your thoughts on the government's general handling of the situation? Do you think that more should have been done? I mean, I believe Suella Braverman a few weeks ago visited Leicester to speak with some local community leaders. Correct me if I'm wrong, but do you think that more should or could have been done? What more can be done by the government?
Well, I think firstly, I don't speak for the government and I'm not part of the government. I am the local member of parliament for Leicester East, which means I cover the full breadth of Leicester East, where both sets of so-called disorders happen, both in Belgrade and in North Evington Green Lane. So my focus is my community and therefore what the response to that. And I think that I differ slightly to the narratives that have been presented thus far, simply because I believe that this is about politics and it's nothing, in my view, to do with the religion of Islam or being Muslim or indeed the Hindu religion whatsoever. And I think that what we're talking about is a politics of fear and a politics of organization against and the reality that we need to organize against inequalities that exist. So we are talking about fringe elements rather than whole groups. We're talking about fringe elements led and inspired by political right-wing nationalism, fascism, and blatant racism, which reared its head in Leicester and in particular in my constituency of Leicester East. You might wonder why they didn't target places like Clacton-on-Sea or even Leicester South or Leicester West. They particularly chose Leicester East because of its significant range of diversity and so on. So we have to understand what is really going on. We could even date this whole back to even when I was elected back in 2019. For this city to say that it is not aware of this right-wing fascism and right-wing nationalism, we have a short memory, because clearly around the time of my election in December 2019, we saw a level of hate and hatred that reared its head from that same set of materials that produced itself recently. So anti-Black racism was absolutely prevalent and from the same identity and background as where the hate recently has come from. We only had a pandemic in between, which stopped and prevented the escalation probably of this, in terms of what we're seeing today. The police, of course, the government's response is the police. We've become a police state in my constituency. I'm not saying that that is necessarily wrong at this moment in time, but in reality, the reason why nothing else is happening is because the police on the street outnumber the people on the street. And certainly if you are in groups of more than 5, the police will break that up. We're in a police state at the moment, and it's policed very heavily and very carefully so that no one can misstep in any shape or form. What happens when the police leave, because you will know that we have police support from outside of Leicester, and certainly a significant number of police in this particular ward, more than any, or this particular constituency, more than probably any other constituency right now. So it is pretty heavy with police at the moment. And the intent of that was made clear, and that it would remain heavy until at least November and beyond. We're talking about a level of intervention in terms of the level of hate has led people to feel angry and scared. And even to this day, I have constituents tell me that they still haven't left their home. They were that fearful. Why haven't they left their home? Because the violence didn't happen just on the streets. The violence happened in their WhatsApp groups and in their social media and online. That material of hate, which is not dissimilar to the material of hate from a minority of groups or ideas was the same type of material of hate that was in and around the time of my election. And so that material of hate was about enabling residents to feel fearful of their neighbours, people that they've lived with peacefully for so long. They were made by the material that they were receiving to suddenly feel fearful. And add to that, if we want to understand where that right-wing nationalism, fascism, and racism came from, and I'm suggesting that a lot of it came from overseas. But add to that the level and intensity of that coming from also from the UK. And indeed, I have people telling me that, asking me, for example, is Tommy Robinson still coming to Leicester? So people believed his video that he put out, just to add to the complexity of it all. And we have to understand, why it is that this minority viewpoint chooses to rear its head and target our community. Leicester is a peaceful, multi-faith, multicultural city that welcomes people of any faith and none. It is the city where I was born and where I grew up. My father worked for decades on Green Lane in Watkins, at a time when the manufacturing base was huge and at a time when unions were strong. And it was also at a time, of course, when people obviously engaged and worked together. And of course, we have shared histories because of the level of arrivals to the UK. So it would be, it would be deeply wrong for us to now assume that Leicester isn't peaceful and Leicester isn't welcoming and it isn't engaging of all faiths and none, which it is. But the reality is we have a minority fringe element that sought to cause disharmony and disunity. On top of that, what you have is you cannot ignore the fact that, yes, a group of young men mainly, as Shockat indicated, covered themselves in balaclavas, arrived with surgical gloves, were covered from head to toe, intent on causing this disharmony and disunity based on their ideas and ideologies from who knows. But we do know a significant number of people came from outside of Leicester, because we know that from the arrests that were made, the police still have 6,000 video footage to go through, but a significant amongst the arrests that they've made thus far is a significant number of people who were from outside of Leicester. But nonetheless, there were a number of people from Leicester who also got caught up in the disharmony. Some people, because you have to understand, as the Member of Parliament for Leicester East, everybody that needs help is coming to my doorsteps for that help because I am their Member of Parliament. And so some people have been caught up in the Policing Act of Joint Enterprise, which basically requires no intelligence, but the fact that you were present at the time of the disorder means that you committed the same crime as the person who was actually wielding the baton. So some people, of course, and families are fighting those kinds of what they regard as injustice. But nonetheless, a number of people, Leicester people, were amongst those that were balaclavaed up and carrying weapons and tooled up and so on. So you have to ask yourself, why is it that this minority of young men, mainly, who thought that they should follow and engage in the act of violence, whether coming to cause the violence or whether they felt that they were defending their community, nonetheless got caught up. And you then have to look at what are the dynamics of what else is on offer in this area and in this city. And I can tell you that actually not a lot is on offer in terms of quality jobs employment and opportunities. What young men have got to look forward to is a lifetime of factories that underpay them even the minimum wage. Poor pay is rampant in this constituency. Nothing that has been done thus far has stopped this. People are still being paid £5 an hour and even less if they are merely packing, I'm told. And this is unacceptable. And equally, what we have is a dearth and absence of any statutory provision that provides any sense of after school activity provision or youth clubs. And that I think causes a problem when you then look at how do people build resilience and correct their ideas. A lot of people are walking around in my constituency, I'm afraid to say, with conspiracy theories writ large, because they spend a great deal of time to tell me about their conspiracy theories that in an ordinary world would be challenged and their ideas would be checked. And indeed, they may change their views about certain things that lead them to have those ideas. If you know this, you know how racism works, right? So if a great deal of ideology, false information is spread in a community, it's not that whole community that's going to engage in the act of violence. It is going to be a minority, but they are egged on by the fact that a majority or many people believe in the racist ideology. And it is racism writ large in the sense of what people tend to believe. But nothing is challenging that. And I have to say that it's not because we don't have facilities and resources that have sought to spring up in the absence of local authority or public sector institutions that were cut because of austerity, but because we have plentiful in my constituency of organizations, particularly faith organizations, that have stepped up to fill the vacuum and try to provide a safety net of support to young people. 19 temples, Hindu temples, 17 mosques, 6 Sikh Gurdwaras, never mind the many Christian and church organizations and other faith organizations that exist just in one constituency of Leicester East. The reality is, though, those organizations, and when I visit them, are doing tremendous good work. We have to remember these are the organizations that supported people during the pandemic, saved people's lives, fed people. But the reality is they are providing work facilities for young people and support to young people and to their communities, but it's in those individual communities that they do so. Excellent support that they provide, but there is no sense of engagement in terms of provisions, facilities that provide a channeling of ideas and working together to build resilience and challenge thinking, thoughts, and ideology. And I think that poses part of the problem. In Parliament, of course, the response has unfortunately been limited. And of course, you have the same sets of divisions around why this occurred, because mainly parliamentarians are listening to the media, unfortunately, because that's the way that racism works. If you can't understand what's going on, the media's first presumption is to say this is just communal inter-violence, or it is something to do with Muslims and Hindus. No effort to try to understand what's really going on at all. And so you'll have members of parliament stand up in parliament, and they do so with parliamentary privilege, because nobody's going to question what you say in parliament. You can say what you want in parliament and nobody's going to come back at you. You can stand up in parliament, as I've heard Conservative members of parliament do, and blame Muslim communities for as long as you want, and others can blame Hindu communities for as long as they want, and nobody's going to challenge that, it's seemingly, because that is seemingly the privileges of Parliament. It's time to correct the picture. The media have presented a narrative. We must stop buying into that media narrative. It is not about Muslims versus Hindu. That is far too simplistic. It is more to do with the political right-wing nationalism that I speak of, fascism and racism. And I'll just end slightly on this because I've got some, there's some figures somewhere in the sense of with some independent research carried out by an organization called Logically, and that's a global research firm, and they confirm a series of coordinated false narratives were portrayed through social media that played a role of facilitating the mobilization of individuals onto the streets. The research firm actually found that 81% of tweets that contained inflammatory hashtags relating to Leicester between September the 17th and the 21st, and that is the critical weekend where the country became aware that there was a problem in Leicester. 81% from their research said that originated in India. Now, we've got to understand what this is really about. We know from research from human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch that they have talked about some of the difficulties about the politics that currently enshrine the leadership of India at the moment. The Human Rights Watch International warned that the government of India, for example, has adopted laws and policies that systematically discriminate against Muslims. And I'm not saying, I'm not going down the road of indicating that, in a sense, that the government of India is against Muslims particularly, but I think that there is a problem with the protection of religious minorities in India, which is then overflowing into the kind of fringe elements that then take that and use it to kind of perpetrate a level of hate against particular minority communities. And it's the same play in terms of how racism is played out in the UK that we are basically seeing. But when you see the stats, and you cannot ignore the online influences that there have been, both in terms of the social media organizations, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, to name a few, and then the WhatsApp material that was coming through that has been shown to me by residents. I'm appalled by the level of hate that has been circulated and perpetrated and allowed to remain online in places and spaces that not only have, in a sense, been a bedrock to what happened, but have caused people to remain in fear and live in fear inside their own homes. I think it's appalling. And that's, I think, if we're going to move forward, we have to get to the bottom of all of that.
Thank you very much, Claudia, for that very sort of very comprehensive and very insightful overview. You touched on a number of very fascinating points there, very pertinent points. I think if we had, as much time as we needed to discuss this, that I'm sure we would love to get into. And there's certainly a lot more to be discussed. I think now moving forward.
I just want to say one more thing as well. We are talking about the politics of divide and rule. This is a politics that has not left us since the partition of India. Britain is complicit in this politics of divide and rule. That's where it came from. And it's a political tactic which is used to split the strength of working class power that can create democratic, equal, and peaceful societies that actually we all deserve. We cannot underestimate this politics of divide and rule. That is what's going on. It's a politics that seeks to hide the realities on the ground, that people are living in abject poverty, and that they lack opportunities and a future and hope. We've got to change that narrative. It's easier for the media and the political elite, the institution that I come from in terms of parliament. It's easier for people to talk about divisions, communal divisions, than deal with the issues that are affecting working class communities on the ground in Leicester East.
Thank you, Claudia. I think that's the tragedy of all it with this clearly simmering and the lack of action. I think focusing on obviously the kind of perhaps positive or forward-looking element of this in terms of the inquiry. Shockat, if I could come back to yourself, obviously you alluded to this earlier with the Mayor's independent inquiry having been launched. Just very briefly, could you just let us know what the status of that is and what you think the inquiry should examine in terms of the most important aspects of the disturbances, such that many of the issues that Claudia brought up can actually be addressed, such that we don't return to this very dire situation that unfortunately has plagued Leicester for the past number of months?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it was quite swiftly announced. I mean, there was a little bit of pressure, I'm sure, from Sharmen and other councillors on the Mayor to ensure there was an independent inquiry or a public inquiry, sorry, into this. He has appointed academics from both Leicester University and De Montfort University. It's the terms of references that's going to be very interesting, dates and the times, because as Claudia alluded to, this is not something that's just happened in a vacuum. So we will need to ensure that there was a period of time where this has all accumulated to what happened last month. So all of these things are going to have to be taken into consideration, and looking at these external forces, foreign ideologies, fascist ideologies, and everything of that nature is going to have to be taken into account. We cautiously welcome it, but we will wait to see what the exact terms of references are.
Just staying with yourself, Shockat, for a second before moving on to Sharmen. So looking to the future, sort of Claudia, touched on a lot of the issues that need to very much, firstly, obviously be acknowledged before being addressed. There seems to be a lot of ongoing issues, a lot of misconceptions that are being brushed under the carpet due to the misconstrued media narrative and political narrative. In terms of yourself, sort of Shockat, beyond just the inquiry, what do you think needs to happen to, as we said, to avoid such tensions in the future and to protect the harmony that Leicester has enjoyed for decades? What would you say needs to be done moving forward?
I think it's going to have to be a multi-pronged approach. We're going to have to build bridges, community cohesion programs, and we will do. As Leicester's a great city, we've lived together for close to half a century and will continue to do so. But there's going to have to be some elephants in the rooms addressed. And one of those fundamentally is going to be an acknowledgement that there is this ideology that is dividing our communities. And that is going to have to come from conversation and discussion. Look, as a Muslim, we have been used to and accustomed to having to apologize for political violence committed by people across the world for socio-economic reasons. But because they happen to have the same faith or belong to the same faith as a Muslim community, Muslims are asked to collectively condemn it and own it and distance themselves from it and have chants of "not in my name." And so we know as the Muslim community how this feels. So there has to be some sort of acknowledgement that this force exists in our city. So there's an complete silence, radio silence of the existence of this ideological force that Claudia has alluded to, which let's say it comes from the Indian subcontinent. And it's an ideology that is dividing that country, which is being exported to this country. So there has to be some form of acceptance and working together. As I say, this has got nothing to do with the Hindu faith. Hindus are a peaceful, one of the greatest religions in the world, and a peaceful religion. So this ideology has got nothing to do with Hinduism, and we mustn't allow this to become a Hindu-Muslim thing, because it's a fascist ideology. So that has to be accepted, and I think we have to work in a multi-pronged approach, as I've already said, with lots of interfaith work, and we will continue working, living, and doing business together.
Thank you, Shockat. Actually, ending with yourself, Sharmen, sort of having heard Claudia's insights, sort of Shockat's opinions on the matter, would you agree with sort of many of the issues that have been raised? And just as I asked the Shockat, in terms of what you think the inquiry should focus on and what more can be done as a proud sort of councillor within Leicester, as a resident within Leicester, again, what do you think can and should be done that maybe has not yet been done in order to mitigate ongoing tension in your city?
So I broadly agree with a lot of what Claudia and Shockat have said, minor differences, I would say. But broadly, I would say that this is an incredibly complex situation, and this broad sort of stroke approach from the media in terms of pitting communities against each other, the narrative of Muslim versus Hindu, is actually very, very unhelpful to us, because it actually fosters further mistrust between communities. And it is, more importantly, not reflective of the truth on the ground. So you hear this communal violence, you hear about Muslims and fighting with Hindus. But the reality was, on the streets, even on the night of the march, you had Hindu brothers and sisters standing with Muslim brothers and sisters trying to protect them from some of the people that were marching. You also had a Muslim imam trying to protect the temple from being desecrated. And these are the stories that don't quite make it past the narrative, because they don't fit the narrative completely. And I feel sometimes that as the news of Leicester broke, before the full facts of the situation were truly brought to light, there was already a narrative in place ready to be applied to the situation, ready to go for all the articles to be brought out within minutes and hours. And unfortunately, I think that was actually quite unfair and unfair to my city, because actually it didn't acknowledge much of the work that was being done, even from that night, even from months before, trying to heal some of these divides. And I would also agree that much of these divides have been happening for a very long time. So Claudia alluded to the time when she was elected, and absolutely, we saw some of that ugliness rear its head then, with some of the atrocious racism that we saw then. But we also saw it before then as well. So there have been many sort of flashpoints that have sort of exposed the existence of this type of thought. And the reality is, we're dealing with a city that is actually exposing global, national, and local issues. So you've got this global, broader rise of Islamophobia all around the world. There's a global rise of Islamophobia. And some of that has been legitimized in the Indian government, but also even in our governments, because as Shockat alluded to, our communities have become used to almost being policed. But is that a fair way to treat any minority community? So you've got the global rise of Islamophobia, but then you've got national issues where things like austerity, things like Brexit, things like COVID, and then now the cost of living crisis have cumulatively made our communities poorer, so that they are less and less able to defend themselves from ideologies like this becoming rampant. Because the reality is, it doesn't matter if you go to an Indian community, a Black community, a white community, if that community has been subjected to decades of reduction in funding and decades of reduction in services, the reality is any kind of extremism, whether that be anti-Muslim extremism, anti-Black racism, far-right extremism, that type of thing will thrive, because people have no hope. And it's not a coincidence that it was young people at the fore in this, in the events of the recent weeks. Young people are the ones that have been mostly impacted by many of the cuts, like Claudia alluded to, the cutbacks in youth provision locally. They've been impacted by that. The withdrawal of the EMA allowance, they've been impacted by that. Their education is way more expensive, is more expensive now than it has ever been. So any route of trying to get out of this reality, or any form of trying to embark on an opportunity is much, much harder now for the young generation on our streets right now than it has ever been for the young in the generations preceding them. They are now less likely to ever own a home because house prices have gone soaring through the roof. Housing in our city is an issue. Rents have gone astronomically high. We're getting worse and worse tenanted properties for higher and higher rents. So all of these cumulative national issues are actually being brought to the fore as well. And then you've got the local impact of newer communities arriving and the city not being afforded the resources it needs to settle these communities as we had done in previous generations. So you've got national, global, and local issues all sort of kind of amalgamating together. So this issue is far from simple. And actually the outlook is difficult. It's difficult because the willingness to provide answers from government has not been really forthcoming. The local authority has been forced to make 150 million in cuts in the last the 4 years that I've been around, and on top of that, in the coming year, we have to make another 48 million in cuts as well. So this is a local authority that has less and less money, but more and more complex needs to deal with. So in terms of broadly financial, local government and national government wise, it looks bleak. But what gives me hope is the people, are the people. So from all of the communities, people have said that we are not going to have this on in our city. We're not going to stand for this. And even if we don't have the resources to address much of the structural issues that we are fighting against, we will cling on to that very basic human nature to protect our communities. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to do grassroots work to try and build that trust back up that has been dilapidated over the events of the last few weeks. And it's going to be a slow, but eventually we will succeed in that. But it will take time and a lot of hard work from people like Shockat, from people like Claudia, myself, and lots of other amazing community organizations that are really sort of coming to the fore to support this at the moment.
Thank you very much, Sharmen. I think that was a brilliant way to note a more optimistic, positive, hopeful way to show that there is definitely hope moving forward. I mean, for myself, as someone that is not from Leicester, but is a Muslim, it's brilliant to see all of the work that you are all doing. It is indeed very inspirational.
Can I just come in slightly? Because
yes.
I'm very wary of us building a narrative around the review. And also building a narrative around that this is just a Leicester problem. The reality is it's more than a Leicester problem in terms of the issues. And the reality is that we cannot pigeonhole ourselves into the notion that we're responding to a review. As Shockat indicated, it was a quick fire announcement, quick fire review. I'm sure the Chief Constable of Leicestershire would have wanted to have waited and announced that review together, because that's what it was meant to be. So the reality is that we are a community that have been researched and researched and researched. When I say we, I'm talking about the global we in terms of African, Asian, Caribbean, and other racialized minorities. We have been researched upon research. The disorder that happened in Leicester will not have been the first disorder that happened around the issues of race and racism. And so we cannot be compliant with the notion that we are all waiting for a review, and that the review will come up with recommendations and outcomes that will save us all. And I think that that is not the case. We know that politically made destitution, inequality, indebtedness, exhaustion, fear, and alienation from each other lay fertile ground for communal violence, if that's what we want to call it, and for disharmony and disunity. That is what we can't allow to divide us. And in that sense, Sharmen is wholly correct to talk about the sense of being able to work together in unity. We must stay united. My fear is, though, unless we challenge some of the demons that exist, even within those who say that they want to show leadership in this city, around the issue of what unity looks like. If we unite around the concept that we must only unite around the concept of those who are Muslim and those who are Hindus, we will have missed the actual reality of what is actually going on. Because in a sense, racism knows no bounds in terms of which communities it discriminates against. Anti-Black racism is rife, if you like, and that has to be addressed. In a city like ours, in a city that I was born in, when I grew up, we were all Black. For some reason or the other, we have separated away from this concept, but we need to come united around the issue that actually the fact that people choose to come to the UK, for example, as refugees, we must be united in welcoming those communities. We must be united in welcoming asylum seekers. We must not differentiate against those who are new arrivals and those who are here. These are things that are set to divide and rule us. And I hear all of the stories all of the time from people who should know better. And I think we must stay united, politicize our struggle, and fight, or rather challenge, to end deprivation at a systemic level for any chance of lasting peace. We are a peaceful city. We've come a long way. I know this because I was born in this city. We have come an incredibly long way, but we are also fragile. And that peace can actually break away if we don't stay strong and united. And that means that we have to eradicate some of the demons that exist. And it should not be the case, for example, that we saw this notion of how we wanted to respond to this crisis as a community, where we stood up as men, we stood up as women, we stood up as, XYZ different identities. That is not unity at all, and it's certainly not unity when we don't even recognize that we have power in our own grasp, in our own hands, the power of unity, real unity. And that means we have to undo all of these ideas and ideologies that have been plaguing us for some time. Because remember, we don't have the fortune of what I had when I was growing up in this city, which is a well-resourced after school youth provisions, educational provisions, and so on, that allowed for the challenging of ideas coming together, building resistance and moving forward. That no longer exists in this city. It hasn't existed for at least 12 years of austerity. So we have a lot to catch up on, and a lot to challenge our original thinkings. We have to give peace a chance, but and Sharmen is right. That can come from us as communities standing strong together. But actually, we also need to challenge the establishments that hold the purse strings as well. That if they can't deliver what we need them to deliver, they need to step aside so that we can take those resources and deliver what we need to for our communities. We can no longer continue to live and operate as separate identities. It takes me a long time to get round to all of the faith organizations, community organizations in this one constituency alone. And we have to understand what that means.
Thank you very much, Claudia. On that note, once again, thank you to all of you, particularly yourself, Claudia, given, I'm sure, the busyness of Parliament over these past number of weeks. Thank you very much for taking the time out to join us. Thank you to yourself, Sharmen, and I hope that both of you and Shockat as well continue the great work that you are doing, I'm sure very humbly, very enthusiastically, for your local community in Leicester. Once again, thank you very much to Shockat for joining us. Please do follow the Community Policy Forum online, on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, in order to stay updated with our latest news, events like this, our podcast series, And for any latest updates on our work and our research, make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube, where you will have watched this panel discussion. And for further information about the work of Community Policy Forum, please visit our website, communitypolicyforum.com. Thank you very much once again to all of our guests. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.